Now, this term, two-tier policing, it's actually had different names over the years. I suppose most commonly defined as just basic discrimination in some areas, but it did take a life on a life of its own. After the Southport riots, the central accusation was that these protests were policed more strongly than previous protests. Nowadays, groups of MPs have concluded that these claims are baseless, and that the way the police responded to the riots that swept the country last summer was entirely appropriate. That was the Parliamentary Home Affairs Select Committee. It's a cross-party committee. It has got a high proportion of Labour MPs on it, responding to violence and criminality that erupted in Southport and later elsewhere. They branded the claims as disgraceful that there was two-tier. This was not protest. MPs said those participating in disorder were not policed more strongly because of their supposed political views, but because they were throwing missiles, assaulting the police and committing arson. And I do believe that was the case. I mean, there's enough evidence that anyone with their own eyes can see a lot of cops getting attacked. We know what happened when the police got attacked at Manchester Airport. We all felt very strongly about that. We can't change our views on these things because we don't like the theme, but I get it. Something went out of control here. They say it was disgraceful to see police officers who bore the brunt of the violence being undermined by baseless claims of two-tier policing. During the riots, police officers were attacked. Shops, businesses, community centres, libraries damaged. Hotels, housing asylum seekers also targeted. This is the findings of the Select Committee. Organised disorder, they say, is rightly met with robust response. Any implied equivalence with planned non-violent protest is simply wrong. This is according to the committee chair, Dame Karen Bradley. Yeah, she's still knocking around. Around about 1,804 arrests were made, and there were 1,072 charges for disorder, with the majority for serious public order offences. Now, they were people who were guilty of public order offences. But is there two-tier policing at work here? And I'm going to declare this absolutely honestly. I mean, journalistically, I could play the mischievous game here and say, absolutely. There were things that were said on social media where people went to jail for a very long time that I have a huge problem, more so than I do someone throwing a brick at a copper's head and getting a long prison sentence. But the reason I'm torn on this, of course, is that I've been doing this job for quite a long time, and I can't remember an era where we didn't discuss two-tier policing, even though it wasn't really given that name. And now it rather handily, tier rhymes with Keir, which makes the whole thing, you know, much like Thatcher and the milk snatcher. It all works rather well. But what is the truth behind it? Now, black communities have argued forever that there's two-tier policing and two-tier justice, for that matter. Some of the stats might even bear this out until you read deeper into the headlines. But you take the point. That's been an argument forever. Even our good friends over there at Just Stop Oil argued two-tier policing and two-tier justice after a group of them was sentenced to, I mean, they got 4-year prison sentences for bringing the M25 to a standstill. And we all said, good, absolutely right. We didn't kill anybody, but it was a dumb thing to do. One of them, Roger Hallam, I think he's the leader over there at Just Stop Oil, he got a 5-year prison sentence for stopping some traffic. So the two-tier accusation is kind of alive and well. And we have forever, when I used to do a bit of court reporting, and I remember, constantly watching the most egregious and extraordinary serious crimes go to almost unpunished, a non-custodial sentence for paedophilia and sex offences. And, then you'd go the following week, I'll be at Maidstone or Canterbury Crown Court or wherever, and, somebody who'd, not paid their TV licence, getting 9 months. And you think, hang on a second, in this very court last week, the very same judge let somebody who downloaded porn, child porn, walk free. Somebody who didn't pay their TV licence just been slammed up for 9 months. I mean, my point is, I guess to a degree, it's always been there. And when it comes to the riots last year, of course, the obvious comparison is with 2011, where again, we saw people who were given pretty lengthy prison sentences. When on any other day of the week, I don't think those sentences were given. I sense, and apparently this doesn't come from Downing Street, but the judiciary or any form of government Department of Justice, Home Office, whatever, the judiciary tend to really go big guns in a riot situation. That's my only conclusion. But is it more orchestrated? The sort of suggestion from those critical of our justice system and our police is that this was orchestrated. This was from the very top. They worked this out, right? These are right-wing nutters. That's what the likes of Starmer would have you believe. They're right. So therefore, we're going to lob them all into jail where we can. And that includes those who wrote bad words on social media. I mean, the social media thing, I think maybe is a slightly separate point. MPs were also said the criminal justice system failed to keep pace with the social media age, which created an information vacuum that allowed disinformation to flourish. Look, I don't know if we'd have known more about the Southport killer. I'm not absolutely sure that would have necessarily stopped riots. In fact, it might have possibly caused more of them. I mean, I think there is an argument on that. So I'm royally confused about this, and I know that my job is ordinarily to fall down on one side or the other on this, and I can clearly see where there are holes in lots of arguments that Yvette Cooper and Starmer and the like have put forward. But I'm intrigued by the question, two-tier policing, fact or fiction? Let's get a word on this and the other big stories of the day. Isabel Oakeshott is Talk's international editor and a regular with us on the programme. Isabel, good afternoon. Can I say Happy Easter, or is it too early, or is that even a thing?
Well, I want it to be a thing. I mean, we are a Christian country,
I'd
apparently.
forgotten about that, yeah.
And yeah, I think it's very important. So yeah, I mean, traditionally, actually, Christians don't say Happy Easter during the run-up to Easter. You only say Happy Easter on Easter Day, and certainly not on Good Friday, maybe borderline Easter Saturday. Remember, my dad used to go struggling through Lent without any beer and used to declare that Easter had begun very late on Good Friday.
Yeah.
But I think we're a little bit too early now.
Yeah, I'm with your dad, I think.
The debate that you've opened with, I think, is so fascinating, and people have really very, very strong feelings about it. And many of our listeners will feel, frankly, gaslit by a report that says, this is all in your imagination, people. There's no such thing as two-tier policing, because there were quite egregious examples of it. And you mentioned briefly what happened at Manchester Airport and the attack that we saw. It's not an alleged attack. You can see it on video, and how long it took the prosecution service to actually charge those two young men as a very obvious example. I think there's another dimension here that hasn't been explored at all and is really interesting, and that is the advice that was given, the legal advice that was given to those who were charged with, in the wake of the riots, with behaving very badly at the scene of the unrest. And almost without exception, these people seem to have been advised by duty lawyers to plead guilty to violent disorder. And that's a really unusual category of offence that automatically carries a very high penalty. And in many cases, I think that they were very, very badly advised by lawyers who, I'm sure for the best of reasons, I'd love to hear from a lawyer that was involved in those cases. For whatever reason, I'm not saying there was any conspiracy here, but I don't think that many of these people should have pled guilty. I think they might have had a much better chance of getting away with a custodial sentence. So was there two-tier policing or not? In my view, absolutely there was. You have to look at what happened in Hare Hills in Leeds, where there were very relatively few arrests, and I'm not sure how many have gone to jail for that. But I appreciate that, sometimes a story gets legs, and what's in the public mind is more exaggerated than the reality.
I wonder, I mean, I mentioned 2011, and we've looked at this before when, there was the famous case of I think he was a student that got 6 months for nicking a bottle of water out of Lidl or something. But that was when the riots were happening. And it's been argued, not unreasonably, Isabel, that, that was the same thing then. There was a similar thing going on. It was against the backdrop of public disorder and riotous behaviour are the kind of the worst scenarios for judges and the like, because they look at this as something that could, easily spiral into something even bigger. So they put out, a warning shot by way of heavy sentencing. I mean, does that wash?
Well, I mean, I'm probably instinctively quite in favour of warning shots, in favour of, in terms of trying to regain public order. And I'd quite like to see some warning shots, for example, for petty theft, and for example, for carrying knives. So I'm conscious you've got to be consistent on this. I'm saying I have to be consistent on it too. And you mentioned about the Just Stop Oil protesters. I mean, I actually think probably 4 years is too long for stopping traffic on the M25, even though I absolutely deplore what those Just Stop Oil protesters did and the disruption they caused. So I think there's a sweet spot, isn't there, between making an example of people and perhaps a custodial sentence for being part of a riot, even if you didn't hurt anyone, even if you were only on the fringes, is necessary to send a message to society that this isn't how we do things in Britain. But do people need 3 years or 2 years or even 1 year for that? A short, sharp spell would seem more proportionate to me. By the way, I think you're right about this whole thing about disinformation and lack of information about the Southport case. Would it have been any better? Would there have been less riots, less trouble outside migrant hotels had people known the so-called truth about the culprit? I actually don't really think so, because the bottom line is, although he wasn't he didn't come over here by boat, he was born in the UK. He was the child of relatively recent immigrant parents. They'd been given refugee status from Rwanda. That would have inflamed people. And my goodness, if people had seen the real photograph of the culprit, I think they would have gone nuts as well. So it's a really difficult one, that.
Indeed. We'll continue to take calls on that. And, of course, this as well, huge story. British Steel trying to reverse what they're calling Chinese sabotage of what's happened there in Scunthorpe. British Steel's woes should push ministers to cut Chinese firms from key infrastructure. MPs are warning amid fears of sabotage and reliance on imports. Exchequer Secretary to the Treasury, James Murray, spoke on Talk this morning. Let's have a listen.
The alternative is that we hadn't come in on Saturday to change legislation in Parliament, that we weren't stepping in with having officials on the ground trying to get the raw materials into the blast furnaces, and the blast furnaces would therefore be closing. And if they closed, then we would be on the hook for north of £1 billion worth of costs as a result of land remediation and dealing with workforce issues and so on. So the best way of us stepping in, the best way of us intervening is to make sure that we keep the blast furnaces going. Because Jingye had been behaving irresponsibly in the last few days, saying they were going to accelerate the closure of the blast furnaces. We need to keep them going to help secure the future of steelmaking in the UK.
Speaking with Mike Graham on The Breakfast Show this morning. I mean, this is a bit of a mess, Isabel, and I said at the very beginning, I think we can go, I mean, this government have not been great on this, but previous governments haven't either, really. The Chinese have sort of had their merry way. There's been a big fat green go sign whenever the Chinese came to town, and nobody's really bothered about it too much until now.
I mean, what absolute astonishing naivety on the part of the last government to ever allow the Chinese to get their long tentacles into this incredibly important asset. When will governments wake up and understand that the Chinese are not our allies? They are quite the opposite to that. And, they largely consider the UK either irrelevant or just another kind of asset that they could acquire by hook or by crook, and by stealth or directly or however it may be. The idea that we're going to be able to do amiable, cooperative, equal footing business with the Chinese regime is completely insane. And anyone who's studied the tiniest bit about how the Chinese regime operates all over the world should understand that there's one word that dominates it. It is exploitative.
Yeah. There's no doubt about it, and that is, you know, that's their kind of MO, isn't it? That's how they function, that's how they roll. They wouldn't even deny it.
Yes, I mean, it's a kind of modern day colonialism that is all over the world. You know, they are going around, and including, by the way, in many of our Commonwealth ally countries, small Caribbean nations that desperately need friends. They need investment from overseas. They don't get much joy from the UK, that seems to not really be tremendously interested in working in partnership with them. So when the Chinese come along and say, hey guys, you know, would you like a new airport, or would you like a new port, or would you like some new road systems? They say, well, yes, please. And, you know, never mind the small print, because actually we really would need this airport. And, you know, this is a way that the Chinese regime is getting a footprint all over the world. And nobody should be any doubt about this. It is a modern day colonialism.
Yeah, spot on.